We at Sustainable Conservation have many years of experience working with growers on groundwater recharge as well, in the beginning, it was kind of a novel practice of really looking at how can we put water back into the ground and use agricultural lands to do that. And so we've built quite a store of expertise and knowledge on groundwater recharge. And we worked with the California Sustainable Wine Growers Alliance to develop a guide specific, building on that experience, but then specific to vineyards. Come on, there we go. All right, so under the groundwater management, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, we have these 6 undesirable outcomes of groundwater. You all may be familiar with this already. You know, before 2014, before SGMA, there was not a coordinated groundwater management across the state of California, and that's what SGMA is designed to do, is to create a system of groundwater management across California. And the goal is to avoid these undesirable outcomes. And we have a lot of these undesirable outcomes sort of already in place, right? We already have basins that are overdrafted, that the groundwater levels have been lowered over years of extracting more water than is naturally replenished. So avoiding these undesirable outcomes and balancing groundwater budgets. So we know to balance a budget, you have to manage the outputs and the inputs so those two things stay in balance. So in an aquifer that does not have wells, does not have extraction, the inputs are precipitation and then recharge, which is the water that actually filters down through the soil and makes it into the water table. So that can come from precipitation. It can also come from other water bodies and like seepage out of rivers down through the soil profile. And then your outputs from an aquifer with no wells are evapotranspiration, so the water evaporating off soil surfaces, and then also coming through plants from the uptake through the roots and then out through the leaves. And then subsurface flow. So underground water is not static. It doesn't just sit there like it's in a bowl. It moves from side to side, and it moves vertically as well, from upper levels to lower levels. But when we add extraction, we add an output, right? So these are all the wells that have gone in across the world, right? Since the advent of pumping technology. And in California, we are in many places extracting water to a greater extent than can be replenished by these natural processes. So looking at these groundwater budgets and knowing that we have this goal of balancing the groundwater budgets, we have to ask ourselves, what can we manage in this scenario, right? So one thing we can do is we can increase recharge. So we can augment the natural recharge that goes on in the landscape. We can do artificial recharge. We can intentionally apply surface water to sink it down and to send it to the groundwater. Modeling studies, climate modeling and hydrologic modeling, have shown us that we cannot recharge our way out of this crisis. There's not enough available water. There's not enough available land. Recharge is not the silver bullet. It's not going to provide 100% of the answer to our unbalanced groundwater budgets. And we know that we're also going to have to shrink that extraction piece as well. So we also have to think about demand management and think about reducing our groundwater uses. So on to aquifer recharge. So what is MAR? You might hear this acronym in a lot of different places. Managed aquifer recharge. So this is that artificial process of taking excess surface water when it's available, spreading it on the land, and allowing it to infiltrate down to the aquifer. And when that takes place on agricultural lands, we call it AgMAR, or we call it on-farm recharge. And you'll hear those terms used interchangeably. And basically what that is taking that extra water and applying it to the surface of the land and just letting it sit until it infiltrates. And vineyards can be really great places to do this, right? Vineyards are really well positioned in terms of water quality. So the industry has invested a lot in sustainability. The crop is typically a crop that uses less nitrogen than other crops. So it poses less of a risk for nitrate leaching into the aquifer. And then also, recharge water is mostly available in the winter, as Ryan was showing. Those flooding events, those high precipitation events come in the wintertime while vines are dormant. And while the vines are dormant, they can really tolerate intermittent periodic flooding, which is what managed aquifer recharge looks like on a lot of vineyards. Vineyards often also have invested in soil health practices like cover cropping, and those things really improve infiltration. So when you're applying those high volumes of water in the wintertime, getting it into the soil can be a problem sometimes, but having a cover crop, having good soil health, good soil aggregation, good soil structure, all of those things help to enhance the infiltration on the vineyard. Vineyards in transition can be a great location for recharge. So when a vineyard's been pulled out in anticipation of changing the crop type, or just maybe the vines have reached the end of their lifespan, those fallow fields, that fallow time period could be extended and recharge allowed on those fallow fields, or just in that inner space between crops, can be a great time to put recharge water on. And then also vineyards that maybe are on a slope that can't do flooding. There may be unplanted acreage surrounding the vineyard that could offer some recharge opportunities. And we'll get more into that a little bit later when I get into the guide. There are some challenges on vineyards as well. Vineyards are often drip irrigated or micro sprinkler irrigated, so they don't have the infrastructure for flood irrigation. So if you wanted to do this style of flood irrigation, it can be hard, right? Because you don't have those systems in place. And also, vineyards are often located on hill slopes. Again, not conducive to flood irrigation. There are regulatory considerations when you're applying that extra water, having the right to divert that surface water and apply it for recharge purposes. Water quality concerns, depending on the source of the water, might require permitting from the regional boards, or it might require a CEQA process. So those are all things that are considered in the guide and laid out in the guide. And then in areas where there isn't a severe overdraft of groundwater, the governing bodies, the groundwater sustainability agencies that are in charge of managing the groundwater sustainability plans, they may not be as invested in helping growers to do recharge. And so there may not be a lot of help available. So especially in areas that are sort of outside ground zero for groundwater overdraft, that southern San Joaquin Valley, Tulare Lake Basin, areas that are outside of that have a less dire problem with groundwater overdraft, and so they may not be as invested in recharge. And then, as we all know, current markets are not that great for grapes. So talking about a practice like this that does not have a direct correlation with a profit increase. Doing recharge may incur costs, and it does not increase your bottom line. And so without incentives, without some kind of help from a GSA or other agency that's really promoting recharge, it may not be possible. It may not be financially feasible. When we started working with CSWA on this guide, we interviewed several growers and asked them what their concerns were about recharge. And so these are the things that came up for them. First, erosion and drainage issues. So thinking about putting a lot of water on a vineyard, and how do I protect the structure, the soil of the vineyard from erosion, and how do I make sure that it drains properly so that my vines are healthy? Second, cost. We just talked about that. Plant health. So will intermittent flooding for recharge, will that damage my crop? And nobody wants that. Nobody wants the crop to be hurt in this process. And then basically, is it worth it? Is it worth the cost? Is it worth the trouble for the benefits that we see? Whether that's, local flood risk reduction or local water supply increases, is it worth it to me? So these are all the questions that we tried to address in the Groundwater Recharge Guide for Vineyards. So this is our cover page of the guide. It's out now. When I'm done presenting, I'll drop a link in the chat for you so you can get to it. And this guide is it's really aimed at growers. It's for use by you, the growers, as well as your advisors, your CCAs, your PCAs who are helping you with vineyard management. So we try to give you a lot of practical information, give you methods of MAR that are tested, that have been shown to work across California, and options. So not just the flooding style of recharge, but other options that can be compatible with vineyards. We also get into specifics about vines, and looking at, what are the specific things you need to think about on a vineyard when you're doing recharge. And because we want the MAR to be safe for your crop, for your farmland, and we want it to be effective, we want to make sure that the water actually gets to the aquifer, that we're not just doing an irrigation event, right? We want to be doing recharge. So how the guide works, we start out with a legal and regulatory framework. So that system of governance for groundwater management that was established under SGMA, under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. We give you information about how to find out more about your local GSA, your Groundwater Sustainability Agency, where to find information about the plan that applies to your area. We talk about water sources, like where are you going to find that extra water in the wintertime for recharge? And then how are you going to get it to your vineyard to apply for recharge? So we talk about all of that. We also talk about how can you evaluate your site? Is your site actually good for recharge? Is it suitable for doing recharge? So the soils, the underlying geology, the water quality issues that might be pertinent for your area. So we discuss all of that. Then we get into vineyard specific crop considerations. So thinking about disease management, making sure that we are keeping water applications at a level that is safe for the vines, for the root zone. This middle table here is actually a crop calendar that, based on your soils, based on your irrigation water delivery system and its capacity, how much water can you put on? If we assume a 5-day flooding event, right? How much water can you put on per day safely that should infiltrate and should make it down to the water table? And then how much time do you need in between those flooding events to allow the vineyard to dry down? You can always add more days if you need to do pruning or other cultural practices in the wintertime. But this table is specific to vineyards. It was developed as part of a model that Sustainable Conservation and Earth Genome put together called the Groundwater Recharge assessment tool. So that's in here, specific information for vines. And then last, we give you nuts and bolts. We give you how do you implement recharge? How do you manage that water when it's going on the field? How do you monitor how much water has gone on and estimate how much recharge you've achieved? So again, here's that table that I talked about. It's vineyard specific, the crop compatibility calendar. And we give you the tools to know, like, what are we talking about when we talk about your soil type? What does that mean? How do you find that information? What is you can see the SAGB rating here. So SAGB is the Soil Agricultural Groundwater Banking Index, and it's an estimation or a model of your soil type and how well it can accept recharge water. Your turnout size, so what's the capacity of your of water that can come into the property, and then how many inches per day can you put on for 5 days and keep that root zone saturation below 70%. We feel like that is a safe zone, and it will not waterlog the plants and it will not promote disease. After the 5 days, you turn off the water and you allow it to dry down for a minimum period of time, always adding more time as needed. We also give you links, tons of links to data and tools. So we're walking you through all of these topics, but we're also sending you to different places to find information that's specific to your site. And we tell you exactly how to do that. Um, this is one of the tools that appears in the guide. It's a decision tree. So really looking at, is MAR a priority for me? So after we talk about all the benefits of managed aquifer recharge, we let you decide, is this something that's important to me right now? And is MAR right for my operation? Can I do MAR, either the flooding style or something else, on my vineyard? If I can't do the flooding style of MAR, flood MAR, what are my options for enhancing groundwater sustainability? And you have a lot of options, and we walk you through all of those in the guide, including, recharge on the vineyard through flood irrigation. That's kind of the classic style, through your sprinklers or your drip lines. Um, this one is a new one and it's a little more expensive. Well, not a little, it's fairly expensive. A subsurface or a reverse tile drain. So while a vineyard is in transition, installing drain lines that go down below the root zone, and then recharge water can be applied into those pipelines and then filter down towards the aquifer below the root zone of your crop. So while it's more expensive, it also gives you a lot more flexibility on the timing and the amount of water that can be applied on the vineyard footprint, right? Your vines aren't seeing it, the root zone isn't seeing it, but it's still on that vineyard footprint. And then the fallow field or swale rewilding. So a fallow field, we know what that is. Vines have been pulled out. A swale rewilding is really just taking out problem areas in the vineyard, maybe a low-lying area that already collects water, maybe productivity isn't so good. Pull the vines out of that area, pull the irrigation out of that area, and just add some vegetative cover and let water move into that. Off the vineyard, so in areas surrounding your vineyard, you could actually put in a dedicated recharge basin. This is kind of a picture of a large basin, but on-farm basins that we have seen range anywhere from like 1 acre in area all the way up to 20 acres in area. So they're smaller than what you see kind of down in the South San Joaquin, these giant infiltration basins, right? But they are little pieces, little odd areas that aren't being farmed that could be transformed into a space dedicated to groundwater recharge. Again, with a basin, you can take water at any time of year. It doesn't affect your crop health, and it provides some benefit for recharge. Also, on hillside vineyards, you might have areas upslope of the vineyard or alongside the vineyard where you could implement swales and berms. So just little indentations in the landscape, with a little ridge at the downhill side that collect water and allow a little bit of extra water to infiltrate on the landscape. Very passive, very low maintenance, but also a way to sort of enhance groundwater recharge. And then a flow-through basin is really kind of an enhanced floodplain. You might have a riparian zone adjacent to the vineyard where you could either make the floodplain a little bit wider, or do a shallow basin in that floodplain so that it holds a little bit more water when that creek or river gets to a certain flood stage. So it's basically just expanding the capacity of the floodplain to hold water very, very temporarily at a certain flood stage. And then if direct recharge just will not work on your property, or you can do this in addition to direct recharge, there is demand reduction. So reducing pumping, reducing groundwater pumping. One of the ways is in lieu recharge. So using a new surface water supply like Purple Pipe, like recycled water. So this is a picture, I think it's in Napa County, of a hookup for a vineyard that's receiving recycled water from the local sanitation district. That could be a new source of surface water and allow you to turn off your groundwater pumps for a little while or reduce the amount of groundwater that you pull. There's also dry farming techniques. CSWA has a lot of resources on dry farming. I'm not going to get into that. I think there's a lot better experts on dry farming than me. But using techniques like lower density plantings or deficit irrigation where that works for your vineyards. So throughout the guide, as you work through each section ends with these decision support questions. So kind of summarizing what that topic area is, but then also giving you resources to answer questions, to apply the information in the guide to your specific operation and allow you to then take that information and add it to this worksheet. So as you're answering the questions, you're recording that information on this worksheet. And at the end, after you've worked through the guide, you'll have an outline. You'll have a basic skeleton of a plan that will work for your operation that you've considered. You've considered pros and cons. You've considered what infrastructure you have on your vineyard. You've considered what you feel comfortable with doing on recharge, and you can take this then to a technical service provider, someone who can help you to really flesh out that plan and get the details, like someone at your resource conservation district, someone at the groundwater sustainability agency, who can help you develop that full on-farm recharge plan. So again, the Groundwater Recharge Guide provides information and tools for you, for the grower, to take that practical guidance and apply it specifically to your vineyard. And so thanks for your time.